Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
When John heard the word salesman in the conversation, he was terribly offended and even insulted. The prosecutor thought that it was about him because there was no issue that he could not solve for money. But John decided to wait 10 seconds before letting his anger burst out, and the situation became clear. A good salesman is urgently needed, reiterated Evan, the nominal director of their joint venture. We have a powerful competitor, and we're losing ground. A salesman? What are you implying? John asked, hearing that unfamiliar word for the second time. We need a deputy sales director, Evan explained patiently. A salesman. If we put him on a percentage, things will pick up. We need a rebranding, a reboot, you know? I don't know anything about it myself. I can see from the paperwork that sales are down. No one wants to buy coffee or buns lately. Well, not as much as they used to. A couple more months of this, and we'll go to the world. We won't, but you will, John replied with a sly smile. Muscovites are fed up, of course. The coffee and the buns are of the highest grade. What are they missing, really? Evan shrugged his shoulders and remained silent. What's the competition? The prosecutor asked lazily. Have you ever gotten coffee from them? A chain of coffee shops, and I drank coffee. Evan nodded. They called it the creative Good Morning Hedgehog. It's good. What does a hedgehog have to do with it? John wondered. They spell it in the name with an abbreviation, Evan explained. It's short for DUI. People liked it. Honestly, I don't know what any of this has to do with hedgehogs. Maybe that's why people stopped eating here. The prosecutor was upset, either because of his age or because of his profession. He could not come up with anything like that, even if he tried very hard. So he called his stalls Coffee and Buns. I tried to shorten it in my mind, and it turns out to be CIB, almost like Budget Execution Control. Nothing interesting, nothing creative, just problems. You say they are blowing there. John stretched out. I see. That's my department. They probably put something in the coffee too. That's why people go to them in droves. Their coffee is really good, Evan said firmly. You know why? Because they have new coffee machines, and the product itself is good. Maybe we should get new machines too, and not Uzbek coffee, but Italian. Good thoughts, praised the prosecutor sarcastically. We will definitely have new machines when we deal with this hedgehog. As for the coffee, it's the same everywhere. It's the same in Tashkent or Berlin. Evan could have argued with that statement, but he didn't. A large part of the coffee shop's net profits went into his pockets, and John didn't go into details. Although Evan was a little scared to steal from the prosecutor, he was eventually able to get over himself. The only thing that really scared him was the risk of not having a solid income. And John hadn't had coffee in 5 years. The doctor had forbidden it. And before that he was satisfied with instant coffee. Throw 2 spoons in boiling water, and it's a beauty. No nasty residue on his teeth. The main thing is not to forget to add cognac. That's what you can't drink coffee without. And the buns. A whole village of illegal immigrants near Washington baked them tirelessly, day and night. Not just for him, of course. The prices were lucrative. The markups enormous. So what are we gonna do, John? Evan asked again. We're not going to make it on these sales. Do we shut down? The prosecutor gradually began to understand the meaning of his business partner's words. The sales of his stalls with coffee and buns had fallen sharply, and a zealous competitor had taken over the market. Now it was necessary to look for a man who could bring the business back to its former speed. To fight, to suggest, to act. For some time he thought over his partner's words, massaging his temples, and suddenly it hit him. to hell with half measures. After all, the problem can be solved radically. A salesman for rebranding, you say? I have a better idea, John smiled. Of course, the stalls with coffee and buns are only one project, and not the most important. The prosecutor hadn't read any clever books on business, but he knew all the American proverbs by heart. He especially liked the one that suggested not putting eggs in one basket. Of course, the stalls could be sold, while the business is profitable according to the documents. But then what? He would have to sell the bus stations, then his 2 fine restaurants, the stores, and everything else. What's the idea? The partner asked suspiciously. And the coffee is good, and the name is beautiful, John summarized. What can I say? Talented people to replace us. They're coming? Evan interrupted. They're trying to come. The prosecutor crinkled his nose. He hated being interrupted, but we have experience on our side. Experience and assertiveness. So, what do you want me to do? You invite him to the negotiation, John said. To a restaurant in my neighborhood. You know what I mean. You tell me the place, the time, the table he's gonna sit at least a day in advance, so I can get everything organized. You'll get the instructions later. The important thing is that you don't get anything mixed up. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And then, Evan asked in horror. That's my business, the prosecutor said, clapping his business partner on the shoulder. He's looking for sellers. Be careful. They'll sell you and your country, Evan. You have to think big when it comes to government. Evan preferred not to ask stupid questions, but he had a bad feeling that he would have to take part in something really bad. However, between his own well-being and someone else's safety, he would always choose the former. As they say, his shirt is closer to his body. Understood, Evan replied. Permission to proceed. They shook hands and parted ways. Enjoying the evening in Washington, Evan tried to figure out what the prosecutor was up to. Eliza's restaurant was located in the heart of the DC neighborhood. Large parking lot, 3 cozy rooms, regular crowd, lunch menu a great place. Like in the good old days, there were booths where you could get away from other diners and sit in privacy. You had to book them in advance. However, in the daytime, when all of Washington was working, it was relatively free. In one of the booths, Victor had an interlocutor, a middle-aged man of average height and ordinary appearance. He was escorted into the booth by the receptionist as soon as he said his name. "Good afternoon," Victor said with a smile and looked at the bearded man who was waiting for him at the table. "We talked to you yesterday. Hedgehog is my chain of coffee shops." "Hello, Victor," he answered energetically, stood up and shook his hand firmly, and then even awkwardly embraced him and clapped him on the shoulder. "Here you are, young and successful. The jacket fits well. Thank you for agreeing to the meeting. It's very important for us." "For you?" Victor asked, looking at the only interlocutor in bewilderment. "Are the others coming over later?" "Oh, I represent the big people," the little man explained. "Did I mention that my name is John? I have dozens of business meetings, negotiations. Big people don't have time, you know. They need to rest, travel the world, talk about global warming. They hire people like me. I run a couple of companies in Moscow. Have you heard anything about me?" "No," Victor admitted. The man's verbosity was beginning to irritate him, but who was he to judge a stranger? He hadn't seen me. "Anyway, I'm glad to meet you." "Likewise," John nodded. "And you didn't even make inquiries. You must be one of the new wave of businessmen. The reason you haven't seen me is because I'm always in the shadows. Big money doesn't like fuss and publicity. We started out in the 90s buying milk from collective farms, then trucking it to factories. Then we started building materials, tiles, panels, laminate. They brought it all from Poland, Germany, Italy, but not in trucks, but in containers. And then, it's all very interesting," Victor interrupted him, "but I don't have much time. You said you'd like to invest in my coffee chain. So, why don't we get right down to business?" "That's our way. That's what I like," smiled John. "Right off the bat, as they say. Why don't we have a coffee? We old-fashioned businessmen like to talk about the weather before we pick out clothes. We could do that. A small espresso, no sugar, no cream would be nice. They make good coffee here, don't you know? I'm a big gourmet." Ivan was nervous. He'd done a lot of unsavory things in his life. Deception had become an extension of his personality. He couldn't even figure out for sure where he was telling the truth and where he was lying. The name John, for example, it might well have belonged to him if he had been born in Great Britain or France. In the US, he could only be called Evan. In life, he shaved carefully, but today, for the sake of concealment, he had a thick beard pasted on his face. "Let's order coffee," he said to his would-be victim. "This restaurant respects privacy. The waiter must be called. Unless you push the button, they'll wait all day. There aren't many of those left in Washington, are there?" And John indeed pressed the red button in the very center of the table. Victor grinned. This approach seemed old-fashioned to him. Why couldn't they create an app and put a tablet on the table, so guests could place an order in a couple of minutes and get the finished dish faster? But no, you have to wait for the waiter to come, dictate the positions you want. "Don't you need to wash your hands?" John suddenly asked after a moment of silence. He seemed nervous. "No," Victor shrugged. "We are going to drink coffee. So what about our business? How much are your partners willing to invest? I'll show you a new idea for the layout of the space. Maximum efficiency in a small space. Where's that file?" Victor was looking for pictures of the project on his phone. It's always like this. If you need something urgently, you can't find it right away. He liked the restaurant. The atmosphere was pleasant, and the interior was cozy. Someday he too will reach such a level. He started small. He opened a small stall selling hot dogs and instant coffee. And gradually, step by step, he reached his own chain. So far, his coffee shops only operated in the neighborhood, just where Eliza's was located. He was able to cut costs and increase his control, but all in good time. Someday his chain will be as big as Starbucks or Coffee House. We need investors with more resources in Washington, D.C. We can't do that without them. Buy new machines, open 100 locations. The money will flow. Finally, John exhaled as the door to their booth opened. "They've been waiting." "I'll have an espresso," Victor said, still on the phone. "Would you like a croissant?" He heard a low, gruff voice that couldn't possibly belong to the waiter. "Shall I pour soup on your head?" Victor broke away from the screen to look at the board. 3 men were staring at him, looking at whom he remembered the cop shows he had watched on TV as a child. Jeans, black t-shirts, wrinkled jackets, unshaven faces. Victor saw the distinctive bags in which law enforcement officers usually carried their pistols. He got nervous and felt his feet getting cold. "Put your hands on the table," one of the policemen unceremoniously addressed him. He wore a cap labeled GOC. "Hold it like that. Don't make me use force." "What's going on?" Victor asked. He wanted to fix his tie, but stopped in time. "What have I violated?" "What kind of stupid questions are these?" "Drug control is working," the policeman said. "I'll bring the witnesses and we'll search." At that moment, Victor noticed that his interlocutor seemed to have vanished. A minute ago, he had been sitting at the table in front of him, and now he had disappeared. At that moment, Victor should have been wary and done something. But in his naivete, he decided to go with the flow. "Have I violated anything?" "No," he reasoned. "Do I use drugs?" "No. Let them search me all they want." As the policeman in the cap went to fetch the witnesses, a second one spoke up. "I'm warning you about videotaping," he said, showing the camera. "The recording will be attached to the protocols of procedural actions." "Great," Victor replied. "I'm good on video. Have you seen my Instagram feed?" The policeman grinned, but remained silent. The law enforcers looked like siblings. It was impossible to pick out a single individual trait, the same height, eye color, and even facial expression. If Victor wanted to describe them, he would hardly be able to. The first policeman returned, and with him 2 men who looked around in surprise. One was short and fat, with gray hair, the other tall, lean, and black-haired. "So, fellow witnesses," said the caked operative after the men had given their details on camera. "Watch carefully, so that something illegal does not come out. Speak your remarks aloud, if you have anything. We're filming. Let's get started. Are we clear?" They nodded. All this time, Victor continued to sit with his hands on the table. His palms were sweating from excitement. He tried to stay calm. Now this misunderstanding would be resolved and he would go home. He had a lot of work to do, to check the balance of goods in the warehouse, to study the accounting, to order new items. "Detainee, take all the items out of your pockets," the policeman demanded of Victor. "Name them and put them on the table. If there are things prohibited for circulation, I suggest to give them out at once, voluntarily. Shall I put my faith in the incorruptibility of the police?" Victor asked, and the witnesses laughed. A good start. He was calm. Hardly the things he had on him were forbidden. The keys to the Ford, an iPhone of the latest model, a wallet, a pack of cigarettes, and a lighter. Having laid out and named each item, Victor looked at the policeman with a sense of superiority. After all, he, a young entrepreneur, will be able to achieve a lot, create a business, build a company, and even change the world. And what can this man in uniform do? Look for a black cat in a room where there is no black cat. "You must be mistaken," Victor said. "I don't do illegal business. I have an honest business. I invite you for a cup of coffee. You've heard of my chain, the DUI. I swear to God, it has nothing to do with substances." "Comrades," the operative turned to the men, ignoring Victor's words. "Note that the detainee has not removed the contents of the right pocket of his jacket. Look, the fabric is puffed out." He pointed his finger downward, and all eyes went there. Indeed, the pocket was bulging, and it was conspicuous. The contents of the jacket. Victor shrieked and jumped up. He stuck his hand into the pocket, which no self-respecting man uses for its intended purpose. There was indeed an unfamiliar object there. He reflexively clenched it with his fist. The slippery ribbed surface was as if the coil had been wrapped with duct tape many times. "Get it out," the policeman said in his colorless voice. "I offered to give you the weight. You didn't take that chance. Is everything on the record?" Washington breathed spring. Blocks of ice and piles of snow had turned into huge puddles, and buds were swelling on the trees. The prosecutor stepped out into the closed parking lot of his office and breathed in the fresh air. John preferred to get all his work done before lunch. Then it was time for personal matters. All his cafes, restaurants, car repair stores, and hostels were time-consuming. He got into the car, and within a couple of minutes he had picked up his most trusted companion. "Never discuss personal matters with me in the office," he instructed Evan as they drove toward the center. "Don't be lazy. Go outside, get some air, go for a drive. Turn on the radio to break up the sound a little." "Why?" The interlocutor was surprised. "By the way, we've been working for 10 years, and I've never been in your office. I'm interested, by the way." Evan rolled his eyes dreamily. Rumor had it that John had a pole in his office, on which women he liked could perform a private dance, and there was a sauna in the basement, so that he could combine the good with the bad, all of which, of course, was nonsense. At work, John was a model prosecutor who followed the letter of the law. His office was the epitome of asceticism and modesty. Nothing superfluous. A desk, a safe, a laptop, and an electric kettle. In the most prominent place, the penal code. Every day, at 7:30 am sharp, he was already at his workplace, and he demanded from his employees not to be late, but to come early. the only liberty that could afford the prosecutor a shot of cognac. However, he also had a pole, but not in his office, but at a secret dacha, away from the eyes of his wife and daughter. "And you don't need to go to my office," the prosecutor said. "There's nothing to see there, by the way. Don't make the operatives work easier, or they will put my eyes and ears in front of my desk, and it will be 100% proof. As they say, eat it on a plate, and if you and I are driving around Washington, they're gonna have to run. Today we meet in a car, tomorrow in a park, the next day in a bathhouse. It's not the savvy that wanders, it's the savvy that drives others." "Smart, smart, smart, smart," Evan replied. He always agreed with his partner and never argued. Sitting behind the wheel of the Geländewagen, John thought that he was indeed a man of extraordinary intelligence. What had he been 20 years ago? A miserable provincial who dreamed of strangling the corrupt Hydra. Holy simplicity! It's good that he had mentors on his life path. Everything turned out to be simple and banal. To get wealth, it is enough to become one of the many heads of this mythical creature. "So, what's our competitor?" the prosecutor asked and yawned. "Is it closing?" "Definitely," nodded the interlocutor. "All the outlets have already closed, and we bought up the machines as agreed. The director has disappeared. They say they've opened a criminal case." The prosecutor was silent. Someone suddenly moved in front of him, and the man had to hit the brakes. John said what he thought of the hapless driver. He also memorized the license plate so he could get even with him. "I hope you weren't standing there while the Eagles were working," the prosecutor asked. "You realize you weren't there. Even if they look hard enough, they won't find you." "That's insulting, Chief." "Of course not," Evan said. "As soon as they came in, I was gone." The conspiracy measures taken by the prosecutor were a surprise to Evan. He'd made the call to Victor from the phone John had given him. The beard was glued on by an operative who had also placed a red button on the desk. As soon as the operatives entered the booth, Evan went outside, threw the phone away, ripped off the beard, and left. How it ended there, he didn't know, but it was clear enough that it wasn't a pretty story. "Well done," John complimented him. "Keep your hand on the pulse. If problems like this are going to arise, it's best to nip them in the bud. In our neighborhood, we'll do without salesmen somehow." "As you wish," Evan smiled, even though he had a nagging feeling in his heart. "Stop right here, okay? Near the subway. Where you can't get it by force, you have to get it by sleight of hand," John said. "And if you can take it by force, why not?" When the Geländewagen stopped, they said goodbye. The prosecutor went to his next meeting, and Evan went to check the black bookkeeping. Sure, sales were up again, but that was no reason to give John his money. He was still stealing, but now he was doing it with an inner fear. And just in case, he sewed up all the pockets in his jacket except the inside one. Victor felt the hairs on his head stirring. He pulled the bundle out of his jacket pocket and tossed it on the table. Tightly wrapped with duct tape, the item resembled a parcel from AliExpress that had been packed by an overzealous salesman. Victor turned pale. He began to realize the seriousness of what was happening. "Comrades of the witnesses," the policeman said in a satisfied voice, "pay attention to this package. Now I'll put on gloves and unwrap it. It's not mine," Victor shouted. What was happening reminded him of a bad dream. "I'm not using. What's going on? I demand a lawyer." The young entrepreneur tried to grab the package, but the operative, who had been standing there with the calmness of a sphinx, quickly caught his hand. As if out of thin air, the bracelets appeared, which he used to tightly bind his wrists. Victor grimaced from the pain and began to swear. One of the witnesses, tall and black-haired, looked at him judgmentally. He shook his head and said something like, "Ouch, ouch, ouch." The policeman slowly and carefully, with a clerical knife, cut open the bundle and transparent packets fell out. "It's snow," said the detective. "I've seen it on TV. Look how well dressed he is." "Ooh," the cellar of death. Calm down, fellow witnesses, continued the policeman. In front of you, presumably a loose substance specially prepared for sale. There are 5 wrappers in all. We will put one of them in a small special bag and send it for urgent examination. The others will be placed in the large special bag. That concludes the body search. Any questions? Do you have a guilty conscience? Victor asked. What's going on here? I have a business meeting. A business meeting. The policeman mocked him, turning off the camera. What? You didn't have time to sell, dealer. It's okay. We'll nail all your accomplices. Comrades, read the report carefully. If there are no questions, sign it. When Victor was led out in handcuffs through the hall, he was ready to fall through the ground. Evening came. The protocol was being drawn up for at least an hour. During this time, a lot of people came to the restaurant, and now it seemed to Victor that all of them were looking at him. The rest was a blur. The drug office, the police station, the lawyer on duty. I need to make a phone call, Victor was saying. I need to call my father right away. He'll definitely help. You have to agree with everything, answered the lawyer, a woman in years, as if not hearing his request. You've been caught red-handed, you might say. You have to confess and hope for leniency. What are you saying? Victor was indignant. I'm not guilty of anything. I'm a serious man. You understand, I have a business, employees. I have to work every day. Listen to me, the lawyer persisted. If you're stubborn, if you don't cooperate with the investigation, you're looking at 8 years. You're very lucky. You're literally on the edge. A little more, and it would have been a significant amount, by the way. It was like a bad dream. It wasn't until the second day that he was able to call his father. It took another day to find a lawyer. And when, at last, he was able to familiarize himself with the case file and talk to his client, the defender said in his colorless voice, "It's a bad case, Victor. I would like to be happy, to say that everything will be fine, but no. We'll fight for the minimum sentence." Minimum term? Victor asked with horror. What are you talking about? Yes, repeated the lawyer. I believe you, of course. But there are too many coincidences, don't you think? A coffee shop, a hedgehog, snow. We need to publicize this case as much as possible, Victor asked. I've been framed. There's no need for any publicity, the defense attorney replied. So you'll definitely go to jail. Anyway, we'll work, but don't hope for a miracle. Victor hoped. More than 3 years passed. Walking along the high fence, Victor thought how unfairly the universe was organized. Satellites revolve around their planets, but their trajectories never intersect. He, once a promising entrepreneur, was taken from a good Moscow restaurant, and they're letting him go to Alaska. A coffee chain deflated like a balloon. The judge didn't believe his colorful story, but gave him the minimum sentence. Another woman in a robe thought he performed early and released him on parole. 3+ years turned him from a jolly fat man into a skinny man. It's hard to get healthy on the food here. Soon they'll bring back a nice suit and tie, so he can put it on and spend a few days on trains all the way to Washington. It would be nice to have him back in the same restaurant, preferably on the same day more than 3 years ago, so he could replay the whole thing. Dismissed, the desk clerk said loudly, opening the iron door in front of Victor. Before letting him out, the guard looked carefully at the monitor screen and then through the iron door's peephole. It was as if the computer could have fooled him. The action was automatic and strange. After all, he, Victor, was being released. Would anyone want to break in? Dismissed, repeated the duty officer in a bureaucratic tone, seeing that the prisoner was frozen in a daze. Dismissed? Victor asked again. As the wind, nodded the duty officer and changed his tone a little. I apologize for anything. You understand, it's not a resort here. You're lucky you only did 3 years, and you're on parole too. Some of these dealers are doing a dozen, and they don't see the light of day. I'm not a dealer, the ex-convict threw down and made a step towards freedom. For some reason, this movement was frightening. He was greeted by a freezing wind, and there is no other wind in the north. For the last week, he had spent all his free time calculating the way to Washington, D.C., to get there as soon as possible. He had made a route so that there would be a minimum gap between trains, and he wouldn't have to spend an extra night at the station or in some provincial hotel. He called his father twice, but his phone was silent. They had fought during the last conversation, but Victor knew from experience that his father would not be angry for long. "Dad," he said on the phone then, "you won't believe it. They're releasing me early, almost a year off." "You'll do your best, son," his father replied with enthusiasm. "When you get out, stop all this nonsense. I won't survive your second term." "Dad," Victor snapped then, "what are you talking about? You know it's not my fault." "Yes," he said stubbornly. "Your lawyer and I discussed it. You're my son, I still love you, but understand, you can't ride someone else's coattails into heaven." "Okay, we'll talk about it when you get back. Why are we fighting now?" Victor hung up the phone, and the colony officer stared at him in bewilderment. You could call once every 2 weeks, and even Skype if the chief was in a good mood. On the downside, there was a censor who listened attentively to the conversation, but was silent, and if he does not like something, he can interrupt the call and deprive the next. Alas, the internet in their wilderness often failed. But it was even better. It was unbearable to see my father's suffering face. For the first year of his imprisonment, Victor was still in touch with friends, business partners, and even his ex. But then contact was lost. One of the things that shocked Victor in the colony was the huge black market. You could get anything you wanted here. Only the prices were off the charts. He was really lucky, including his character, thanks to which he quickly adapted to the new conditions. Nothing could be forgotten now, neither the detention nor the trial, which resembled a bad performance. Neither the words of the father, who, as it turned out, was sure of his son's guilt. With him, they will definitely make peace, but a few years of life will not be returned. Walking to the local railroad station, Victor tried to keep his back straight. He no longer had to hide his hands behind his back, shout loudly his surname, first name, patronymic, article, and sentence. Only 4 years in prison, the lawyer told him in his colorless voice after the verdict. "You got off easy, Victor. For possession with intent to distribute, you usually get at least 6. You were saved by good character references and my connections." Of course, if Victor had really possessed drugs with intent to distribute, he would have been happy with 4 years. But the truth is, he'd never touched an illegal substance in his life. The worst part was getting used to the idea that he had written part of the sentence for himself. Why had he grabbed that bundle with his sweat-slick hand? Why hadn't he called a lawyer as soon as he heard the word drug control? Well, Victor thought, approaching the station, I've been a fool and that's enough. Now, I'll learn only from other people's mistakes. As the clatter of the wheels beat the rhythm of the track, Washington was getting closer. His mood improved. Apart from 3 years of life, he had lost only 2 molars and kept his health. The weight loss had definitely done him good. He could now walk for hours without panting or dizziness. Sinking into slumber on the top shelf of the parlor, Victor thought that he could start a new business together with his father. After all, his father used to have a good business in construction. But in recent years he had retired from business and lived for his own pleasure. You could try to return to this sphere, to build summer houses or cottages from natural wood. In the colony he gained invaluable experience working with this material. Life goes on, Victor thought, which meant that he had to find his place again, and to make peace with his father, the only close person on earth. Victor thought that together they would definitely build a new business. They just needed to be patient. If he only knew how wrong he was. Elsa did not drive, but flew, inspired by love. Things were going just fine. A couple of days ago, her father gave her a new car, sports BMW, just chic. Although the engine easily squeezed out 200 kilometers per hour, the car looked graceful and feminine. Elegant interior, leather not only on the seats, but also on the steering wheel and gear lever. The console is painstakingly trimmed with rhinestones and decorated with wooden inserts. This car is just like me, she thought. Beauty and grace on the outside, and power and strength on the inside. Elsa was not yet used to the coolness of her new toy, and therefore tried to accelerate carefully. If you pushed the pedal too hard, the speedometer arrow literally soared up. The car began to fly forward, and the driver squeezed into the seat as if in an airplane. This feeling both pleased and frightened her at the same time. Elsa's heart overflowed with joy because she met a wonderful man. And where? In a nightclub. True love at first sight. He must have been there by accident because he was dressed in a suit with a jacket, shirt, and tie. Not many people go to clubs in that outfit. He wasn't drinking alcohol, he was drinking orange juice. He met her himself, but he listened more than talked. Now Elsa could not even understand why this man had attracted her so much. He was very different from those young men who first tried to get to know her and then shared time in bed. After 2 or 3 encounters with such guys, there was nothing left in her soul, and even if the sex was good, there was nothing to talk about afterward. The new friend, she was sure, was molded from a different mold. She'd never met anyone so deep and intelligent. "You look like a beautiful flower," he told her. I froze in amazement. Although it all seemed old-fashioned, Elsa melted. He led her away from the stuffy club, and they walked around the nighttime Washington, D.C. area. Not far, of course, because she was wearing heels. The man gallantly took her under his arm, and when it got cold he threw his jacket over her shoulders. Elsa looked at the label. Henderson, not a bad brand, beautiful things. Then he walked her to her car and said good night. He hadn't even tried to get her into his bed, or to visit her, or offered to drive to a hotel or a secluded place. Now Elsa was flying home, even though the time was a very childish 2 in the morning. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach. "Will we meet again?" she asked in farewell. On the one hand, she was surprised by the stranger's behavior, but on the other, she was terribly interested. Did men really need more than just sex? Sure, the man smiled. "We'll definitely meet. Washington is just a big village. You run into people you know all the time. I'll find you myself. You don't mind, do you?" "Oh, as long as Dad doesn't find out. He doesn't approve of this kind of thing. When someone's looking for me. My daddy wears epaulets and thinks I'm a good girl. I guess we can get to know each other later," smiled the new friend as he walked away. "Oh well." "Wait," Elsa grabbed the man's arm. "Why aren't we on a first-name basis yet? And what's your name?" She suddenly thought that she knew nothing about this man. He had met her casually, talking about simple things and not telling her anything about himself. "Who is he?" "My name is Victor Gross," the man smiled. "My grandfather was Austrian. He designed bridges for the Soviet Union. He accustomed me to the unacceptability of diminutive variants of a name. Victor, that's all. Will you give me your phone number, Gross?" Elsa asked playfully. She had never once asked a man for his number. Usually they did it themselves. But as it seemed, the man had radically changed the rules of the game. "I don't have a phone yet," he shrugged. "I haven't bought one yet. But you know, if we are destined to meet, it will happen. I can feel it. And I know we'll get along." There wasn't a shadow of irony in his voice. He sounded sincere. So sincere that Elsa almost believed him. Victor slept the whole way from the colony. As soon as he got on the train, it was as if the batteries in his body had been turned off. To think of the simple pleasure of being deprived of the simple pleasure of sleeping when he wanted to, not by the clock. But in Washington, a new disappointment struck Victor. His father, the last living soul on Earth, had passed away. During their last conversation just a month ago, he had complained that he might never see his son again. It was a small consolation that all the wealth had now gone to his son. Aunt Betty, Daddy's sister, told me that he had died on the street and it had taken a long time for him to be identified. She got the call just the day before yesterday. Hart, she said sadly. Imagine, he didn't say anything about you either. You know, that you're in jail. The police only told us. And the funeral was already over. Victor asked, disappointed. Yes, Betty confirmed. A week ago. We couldn't put it off any longer, you know. We wanted to call you, but we couldn't. If only we'd known you were in prison. Your brother was too shy to tell us. He was so proud of you. He went to university, opened all those cabs by himself. Come and see us tomorrow, okay? Victor didn't answer anything and hung up the phone. Now he was the owner of an apartment in Washington, not so big, but not small either. He still had the keys, but the locks were the same. The notary said it would be 6 months before he could get the papers, but he could use it now. All Dad's things were in their places. Car keys to a strong and inspected Jeep, a decent amount of cash for the first time enough. It made Victor sad that he hadn't gained anything himself. All his money had been invested in a business that had fallen apart along with his past life. The small savings had been cleaned out by a lawyer. The car was leased, the apartment was on credit. The bank took it all. Victor went to the store and was surprised at the abundance of food, drinks, sweets. It turns out that Washington has everything. Like a schoolboy, he picked up a full basket of different goodies. He brought it all home with difficulty. He turned on his dad's computer, went online, and began to absorb the events of the last 3 years along with the food he had picked up at the store. On the second day of this vacation, Dad's apartment got a phone call. "Good evening," said the man in uniform. "Lieutenant Walker, I'm your precinct officer. Shall I come in?" Victor shrank back. After the colony, he was afraid of all policemen and didn't trust them. The former prisoner squared his shoulders and decided that he had to be strong, and also to watch carefully the movements of the policeman. "How did you find me?" he asked relaxedly. "How did I find you?" The policeman asked again and adjusted his cap. "So you yourself indicated that you are released at this address. You're on parole, by the way. You need to register." "That's right." Victor slapped his forehead. "You have supervision now," the man in uniform explained. "You have to check in. I was just passing by. I thought I'd drop by. You'll have to come by tomorrow, or you'll go back to the colony. Are you registered here?" "Not yet," the ex-convict lied. "I can't live where I'm registered." "All right." The policeman waved his hand and suddenly asked slyly, "I hope you won't sell this stuff again, or you'll hardly get off so lightly the second time." No matter how much Victor wanted to say what he thought, he had to keep silent. He had to be polite. A return trip to the colony was not in his plans. "I think everything that happened to me was a mistake," the ex-convict said. "I'll never be in that situation again in my life." "That's fine," replied the district officer. "You have to report once a month. If you fail to show up twice, you'll go to the detention center. All the time that was reduced, you will have to continue to reel. I'm not threatening you, but warning you. You Muscovites live well." The front door slammed shut. During the whole conversation, Victor kept his eyes on the policeman and watched his hands. He carefully examined the hallway. No suspicious objects appeared. Now he had to answer the most important question that tormented him all the way to Washington. What next? Go back into business? Find some dusty job? But would they hire him in a decent place with such a biography? Victor opened his closet. He and his father were the same height but different builds. 3 years in the colony had rid the former prisoner of extra pounds better than any diet. It turns out that Dad was a real dandy. Victor chose the best suit, put on cufflinks and tie, and decided that today it was definitely necessary to go out. And he even knew where. Although the evening went well and he met a girl, Victor couldn't build on his success. It seems that the train of his life had gone several stations ahead. Is it possible to catch up with it now? Looking at his satisfied daughter, John could not be pleased. At first glance, his gift was nothing special. Black BMW. Not a woman's car at all, but Elsa herself pointed her finger at it. It cost him a measly $4 million, a pittance. But his daughter's been happy for 3 days now. She's fluttering like a bird. You see, Maddie, John admonished his wife, I'm so right on the money. And you said electric car, electric car. A man needs to feel the engine. And these trains, by the way, they're on fire. They're on fire. Where would we be without you? My wife replied, with an air of subservience. You're the smartest, the most skillful. But look at the happiness in her eyes, said Maddie slyly. She's got someone. You're gonna be a grandfather, Pop. I'll be your grandfather. The prosecutor pouted. Already promised. Remember the deputy minister we had on New Year's Eve? They seem to get along well. Let them take a closer look, of course. John loved and cared for his only daughter. He couldn't let her fall into the hands of a random person, which he considered anyone he didn't personally approve of. Working, Athletic often went to the gym at night, but she dressed like God forbid. Think about it, Maddie, the prosecutor said. Do these young people know anything about love? Didn't you see that guy she brought here to meet us a year ago? She's out of her mind. It's true, the wife replied, surprised that John still remembered that unfortunate incident. But you have to understand, she's the one who has to live with her husband, not you. Knowing her husband's tough temper, Maddie preferred to agree with the prosecutor. And where could she find a man like that? A strong, caring, and above all, extremely wealthy man. He built a house, and that's on top of their huge apartment. Don't forget that she's only 22, Maddie said. Maybe it's not time for her to get married. Maybe she should just walk around and get her mind right. I'll tell you when it's time, said the prosecutor. Are we going to eat tonight? I'm as hungry as an ox. Together with his wife, they made themselves comfortable on the terrace, under the awning. April was good this year. Warm, no rain. It was a good time to dine outdoors. He had chosen a beautiful place near Washington. From here it was convenient to go hunting and fishing. It's nice here in the country, smiled the prosecutor, pouring a shot of cognac. Always told you that you should live in the country. Good, nodded his wife. But it's you who have never been given a plot of land. The prosecutor called the cottage a 3-story house with a large plot of land. The neighbors here were decent, but even from them he's separated by a 4-meter fence. There was no reason for them to watch him live. The plot was really not allocated, had to act on his own. According to the documents, this whole ensemble belonged to his biggest firm. You know what, John, Maddie said after a pause. You would talk to her gently, fatherly, or she will not trust you. Let her have her way with whomever she wants. She'll still marry a good man. You can't force her into marriage by force. Think about it. The prosecutor laughed. Sometimes you say clever things. A fighter with wit fights with a stick. But John had other thoughts in his mind. He decided to use his wife's advice differently. He should make inquiries, find out what kind of fruit his daughter had. Maybe a worthy man, which was unlikely. But it happens. Maybe the daughter herself chose the son of some oilman or banker. But most likely the man will be unfit, or maybe he's got a nice car. You can give him an explanatory talk, and if it doesn't work... Elsa, come here, called the prosecutor. My mom and I are eating steaks. Do you want some? No, Dad, Elsa said. Look how much fat there is. What a nightmare. I've already had a salad. Mom thinks you have a boyfriend. John smiled. I told her to mind her own business, of course. I did. Elsa nodded, and she blossomed. The guy's a dream. Do you know his name? Asked the prosecutor with suspicion and prepared to memorize. I know the name and the surname and patronymic, said the girl. He was so handsome, and his suit was great. He threw his jacket over my shoulders. So romantic. What was his name? Owen was getting impatient. But when his daughter told him the name of her new boyfriend, the prosecutor's eyebrows jumped up in bewilderment. He wanted to shout at her to get this man out of her head, but held back. Perhaps the question can be solved in another way, and dramatically. But check first, because there are coincidences in life. Even if the data of the new suitor completely coincide with the name and surname of the guy he put behind bars 3 years ago. Victor was really lucky, if it's appropriate to say so about a man who ended up in prison for nothing. In fact, he spent not 3 years behind bars, but 2 months and 4 days more. And all this time he was puzzled. Who could he have crossed the road? An unassuming aspiring businessman who could have made a fortune but didn't. All he managed to do was open a chain of coffee shops, and lost it miserably because he hadn't thought through his own exit from the scene. He didn't even have a deputy. Yes, sales were good, and the name and logo with the hedgehog were well liked by the public. But there was nothing surprising about it. Victor was just good at coffee. This skill added to his misery in the colony. Alas, for some reason, prisoners were allowed to drink this beverage only in instant form. You could drink it, of course, but you would not feel any pleasure. While serving his sentence, Victor wondered by whose mercy he was behind bars. Why would he, a medium-sized merchant, plant drugs? He was sent to the edge of his vast homeland to the village of Barkatmoy in the north. There was only one Mickey in the whole colony, and they became friends. By a strange coincidence, they were apprehended in the same neighborhood of the city. And surprisingly, with drugs. "Are you a dealer too?" Victor asked with a smile. It had been several months since the trial, and he had gotten used to his position. "Of course," Mickey replied sarcastically. "That's all I needed. I had 2 service stations. I was on the upswing. I had a lot of work, a lot of money. I wouldn't put my hands on that shit. You hear me?" Dimmer wasn't as lucky as Victor, and he got 7 years in prison. The fact that Mickey had already been caught by law enforcers when he took out a loan with forged documents played a role, but that time he got off with a slight scare. Now the domestic Themisto was no longer so favorable to the merchant and sent him to revive the American North. "I'm an honest worker," Mickey lamented. "I have a family in Washington, children, a mistress." "And who needs you?" Victor asked doubtfully. "I have no idea," Mickey shrugged. "I think maybe my mistress's husband. Maybe he found out about my affairs with her. But that's a lot of connections." Now that he was free and in Washington, he often recalled that conversation. He would very much like to get to the truth. But is it possible? In books and movies, heroes in his situation were supposed to take revenge. But Victor had neither the strength nor the slightest desire to accomplish such feats. His father left him a decent amount of money for the first time should be enough. He could try to start his own business again, go to some other sphere where he a priori cannot have enemies, learn how to make an iPhone app, or make a TV show about his misadventures in juvie. He thought back to last night when he met a girl at a nightclub. She didn't understand his sadness. She didn't even notice it. After 3 years of male companionship, he was completely unused to talking to women. He couldn't even find the right words. Would such a beautiful woman communicate with him if she knew about his past? 3 more days passed and Victor disappeared. Elsa thought he was too strange a man. He clings to her soul, won't give her his phone number, and then disappears. And Dad with his strange questions. Perhaps the best way out of the situation was to forget him forever and not remember him. But now she did not consider this option, because her heart was clenched with pain and a feeling of something bad. What if something happened to him? Elsa thought out loud, "I have to help him. Maybe I should ask Daddy to find him. Daddy can do anything." The girl never seriously thought about how her father, the district attorney, had such wealth. With what money he bought her brand-name clothes and recently an expensive car. Why meddle in his affairs if everything was fine as it was? Her mother taught her daughter that her father was the smartest man in the world and that she should trust him with everything. But could she be honest with him about love? "Daddy," she said, "Victor has disappeared." "So call him," Dad muttered. At that time he was reading another flattering article about himself on a large telegram channel. "I don't want to," Elsa said coquettishly. "Can you find him? Let's say, unobtrusively find out something. What if a person with such data does not exist?" John put aside the tablet and looked at his daughter carefully. "Elsa," he said, "remember, official position cannot be used for personal purposes. Not for anything, not ever. Not even for your daughter?" Elsa smiled. "Especially in the interests of family and friends," the prosecutor cut off. "You don't want Daddy to lose his job, do you? How old did you say he was?" "I don't remember." Elsa stretched out. 33, I think." 33, shouted the prosecutor. "No wife, no children, you say? He didn't give you his phone number. So you answer me why he doesn't call or write to you." He went back to his mistress and was gone. These cruel words made the girl start to cry. John sighed and put his arm around her shoulders. "So he really didn't call you anymore? And he didn't write?" the prosecutor asked. "No," the girl replied. "Tell me this. What makes you think he's your boyfriend now? How many times did you see him?" "Once," said Elsa. "Daddy, I'm so stupid." "Oh, come on," John smiled. He felt a little calmer. Maybe this criminal found out whose daughter he met and decided to keep a low profile. "What should I do?" the girl asked. "Don't do anything," yawned the prosecutor. "You're imagining things for yourself. Men are like that. They're fickle. They come and go, and then they're gone. And Mom and Dad are forever. In a family, they're friends, they live happily ever after." "Thank you. I'll see what I can find out on Monday," John said, "just for your sake. But you keep your mouth shut about it, you understand?" 7 o'clock in the morning. After 3 years of living a regimented life, Victor preferred to sleep at this hour. He was awakened by the doorbell. At first, he just put a pillow on his head and wanted to return to the arms of Morpheus. But the visitor was persistent. After a few long trills, he started hammering on the door with his foot. With difficulty, Victor threw on a robe and went to the door. "Good morning." On the doorstep stood the district officer, cheerful and energetic, despite the early hour. Victor had the feeling that he was looking at a robot, not a human being. The ex-convict cringed at the smell of tobacco. The policeman smoked cheap cigarettes. Hadn't he had enough misfortunes in the colony? And should he continue to endure abuse? "Shall I come in?" the policeman asked, and without waiting for an answer, took a wide step into the apartment. "You are obliged to give me unimpeded access to the premises. At any time." "Well, come in. What's the matter?" said Victor. "At any time." The policeman, without taking off his shoes, went businesslike to the kitchen, opened some drawers. He found a pack of coffee and put it on the table. The landlord was literally stunned by such insolence. But the policeman was not the least bit embarrassed. He took a kettle, filled it with water, and put it on the stove. "Do you use gas?" he asked. "I bought an electric kettle a long time ago. It keeps the right temperature. Can you imagine?" Victor wanted to make a joke and say something like, "Make yourself at home," but it's unlikely the cop would appreciate his humor. Rather, he must have other leverage. "I'll call my lawyer right now," the ex-con said. "I'll tell him that an insolent cop broke into my apartment. I'm obligated to let you in, but I'm sorry about the coffee." "Ah, how rude," the policeman muttered frustratedly and turned off the gas. "I was just trying to cheer up. Do you know what time I got up?" "I don't even want to know," Victor replied. "Well, you don't need a lawyer," the policeman said. "You need to come with me to register." "Is that why you're here?" I sense some kind of trick. "Actually, I can do home inspections as needed," the cop said rudely. "And considering your criminal record, did you know that your brother likes to hide drugs in coffee?" "I don't have any brothers," Victor cut him off. I'll check in later when I've spoken to my lawyer. I'll consider it as resistance. The policeman smiled. I have rights, and you have responsibilities. Get ready immediately. We are going to the police station. And if I refuse? Asked the ex-con. Then I'll remind you that 8 months and a half you didn't make it. Of course, after 3 years that's dust for sailors. All right, Victor replied. The prospect of going back to the colony really frightened him. The policeman named Steve brightened up. He wasn't about to miss the lucky break that fate had given him. Steve had come to Washington 2 years ago, on target enrollment, and had been eager to stay here forever ever since. One thing that was frustrating was the low salary and irregular working hours. Otherwise, everything was just fine. Beautiful girls, expensive cars, all kinds of entertainment. Not like in his native Saransk. And most importantly, prospects. His own apartment in one of the beautiful housing estates that had mushroomed in Washington. A big car on lease. You pay not at once, but in installments. Or, what the hell, a beautiful wife, the daughter of a general, or at least a colonel. That's why Steve was so eager to fulfill the command of big men without regard to personal time. Let's go, said the policeman when Victor got dressed. What did you want? You've got supervision, so be kind enough to take care of it. What if you take up drugs again? I'd lose my bonus. We'll mark you down, give you a preventative talk, and get you back up. As they walked down the stairs, Steve caught himself thinking that he envied this Muscovite. His own apartment, beautiful suits, and most importantly, this capital squint, which the district police officer tried to learn but failed. As if he looks politely, but it looks as if a police officer is being pointed at his place in Saransk. Here, the policeman waved carelessly at the big black Volkswagen. I'll get you there in comfort. Victor stared at the official car in bewilderment. He thought that the car was too big for a police officer, a van with tinted windows. Steve opened the passenger door wide and Victor was pulled inside. A new round of his misadventures was beginning. If there was a hell, John thought, then the first lap would be an all-out personal reception. A sacred duty that was impossible to shirk. Many years ago, some smart guy at the top of the government had decided that prosecutors were terribly out of touch with the people. And every Tuesday since then, John had to sit and listen to the complaints of his neighborhood. Say something. A man in a suit shouted. What on earth is going on? I will complain everywhere and anywhere. I will inform all the media. Don't yell at me in my office, John muttered. You've been yelling for 10 minutes, and I haven't even understood a thing. In fact, the prosecutor only pretended not to understand the purpose of the visit of the man with the surname Frank. He used to do real estate all over Washington. Lately, for some reason, he's decided to invest in tire shops. Open 2 in the neighborhood. I said, when are the inspections gonna stop? Frank asked. We couldn't work all day yesterday. We're losing customers. How should I know? John waved his hands. They're complaining about you. But there's a moratorium on inspections, shouted the customer. Does that mean anything to you? I say they complain, replied the prosecutor with a smile. And we do not conduct inspections, but monitoring of citizens' complaints. We study, so to speak, the situation. I am a law-abiding citizen, he said. I have never broken a single law in my life. The visitor, of course, was lying, but for the first time he met with such an impenetrable wall of incomprehension. Obviously, the prosecutor acted in the interests of competitors. Then you should have named your price. I've been informed, the prosecutor exhaled, that your newly established enterprises grossly violate labor regulations and safety regulations. Show me one that does. Frank wouldn't give up. I can see that you're a government man. You're just looking out for the public interest. I think that should be encouraged. Oh well, the prosecutor stretched out. Go on, go on, go on. Let's say, the visitor perked up. 10. What do you say? 10 what? John asked incomprehensively. Frank smiled, took a small piece of paper, and wrote 10% on it. Now this is serious. The prosecutor changed his face. Are you offering a bribe? How dare you? The visitor turned pale. Didn't he offer enough? 20? Frank asked. No one takes more than that. Get out, shouted John. Get out, and I don't want you here. Get out of my neighborhood. Remember, there's no bribes in this neighborhood. The visitor ran out of the office. The prosecutor never agreed to any 10%. And why would he need these crumbs if the most popular tire repair shop in the district belongs to him? The business, of course, is seasonal, but even in the worst of times it showed good profits. There's no need to spread the customers around. Let this Frank open his own stations in other neighborhoods. Who's next? The prosecutor asked, pressing the button of the telephone. Zenaida, his assistant, filtered the visitors so well that only the most motivated were admitted. No one, the woman answered. An empty hallway. Phew, exhaled the prosecutor. Thank God. Listen, Sinochka, pick up that old material. What's his name? Victor Gross. Now, I'm looking through the database. The woman replied and started tapping on the keyboard. Okay, here it is. When do you want it? Right now. If you try very hard, he will solve all the work issues before lunch, and then you can go around the neighborhood to see how things were going in his territory and what other problems had arisen. Victor looked around. There were two men sitting on the bus. One of them had a short haircut and wore a jacket. His movements were stiff, his gaze intense. The other was dressed a little simpler, jeans and a t-shirt, neat bangs. He looked at Victor with ill-concealed interest, but remained silent. We apologize for our treachery, the short-cropped man said. Circumstances demand it, so please understand. I should have spoken to you in such a way that it would have gone unnoticed. Last time under similar circumstances I got 4 years in prison, Victor muttered. Not prison, but colony, corrected his interlocutor. By the way, that's what we'd like to talk about. There is an opinion in certain circles that the conviction was illegal, and that you were the victim of a dishonest prosecutor. Oh, really? Victor was mock surprised. Who are you? People's avengers, or defenders of destitute convicts? Close, the man's facial features sharpened. The words of the former prisoner did not please him. At this stage of our cooperation, we would prefer not to name names and positions. Otherwise, it would interfere with the operation. Its entire success depends on secrecy. There will be no cooperation, Victor cut him off. Not at this stage, not at the next. I'll call my lawyer right now and let him handle it. Don't you want to know who set you up? The short-cropped man asked. Don't you want to teach him a lesson to punish him? Victor wondered. What does he really want? Perhaps, deep down, he really wants revenge. But after the story of 3 years ago, how could he trust the police? As if reading his thoughts, the short-cropped man said, We're not the police. I know it's morally hard to get over yourself. I haven't served time in a penal colony, but I don't think it's like a sanitarium. It's not evening yet, Victor snapped at me. In the US, you can't stay out of jail. I agree. The man reacted surprisingly calmly to these words. I'm not saying I'm not in danger of going to jail. So, are you going to call a lawyer, or are you going to give us 2 minutes of your time? I can shed some light on your criminal case and explain where you were framed. Though his gut told Victor that he should run away, he felt as if he was stuck to the chair. Was he really going to find out who had set him up? Who planted the drugs on him and accused him of distributing them? At his confusion, the men looked at each other, smiles spreading across their faces. Didn't I tell you to go easy on him? Curiosity, the short-cropped man said. Don't think I'm saying this with malice. No, it's just the way man is. They say that curiosity is at the heart of evolution. All right, Victor muttered. Go ahead. But if I don't like anything, I swear I'll call my lawyer right away. By the way, where's my cell phone? He started digging through his pockets, but he couldn't find the phone. "We apologize for our treachery," the short-cropped man said again, "but the police officer was told that the phone should not be with you. A simple precaution." "Did he steal it?" Victor shrieked. "I think he just left it at your house. We're taking a big risk talking to you. If you refuse to cooperate and share information with anyone, the whole operation will be ruined. So, in a nutshell, a few days ago, you met a girl with a beautiful name, Elsa, and an expensive car. Were you following me?" "No." The short-cropped man's features sharpened again. "We were following her. We suspect her father of corruption. His position is small, but he's a district prosecutor. But the neighborhood is big. The biggest in DC, by the way. Although there's no factories left, not for a long time. It's all gone to lofts and creative spaces. So, why did the DA need me?" Victor figured his only connection to the neighborhood was that it was where he'd opened his coffee chain. The man's explanation that the prosecutor had decided to squeeze his small business seemed strange and even exotic. It was simply impossible to believe. "It can't be," Victor said after listening to the man. "Put me in jail to drown my business. You'll forgive me, but it's a fantasy. I don't believe it." "Did you have any contact with Mickey in the penitentiary?" the man asked. The circumstances of his case also attracted us. "Yes, there was one. It seemed strange to me at the time that our stories were so similar. But don't get me wrong, I still don't believe you. I've already been set up once. Even if what you're saying is true, I'm not sure I want to be a part of it." "They'll arrest the bad man," the short-cropped man assured him. "They'll review your case. Your conviction will be overturned, and you'll have your honorable name back. You can claim compensation." "Will my father be resurrected too?" Victor asked with a challenge. "Look at it this way," said the second passenger, who had been silent until then. "If you refuse to help us, that corrupt prosecutor will continue to run the neighborhood. And the drugs will be found on someone else. You're not helping us, you're helping others. Think about it. What should we do?" Victor asked after a moment's silence. The request of the men in the van with tinted windows made him uncomfortable. When Elsa was completely desperate, Victor suddenly appeared in her life. He stood by her car and smiled as if nothing had happened. There was no doubt that this was the stranger of the night. In his hand, he held a huge bouquet of red roses. Victor didn't look as bright in the daylight. She could make out the bags under his eyes, and also the wrinkles, as if he'd been through a serious ordeal. His eyes were sad, but beautiful. "God, you're so thin," she said, taking the flowers. "We should fatten you up." At that moment, she really felt the urge to take care of him. I guess men's skin turns gray if they don't have a loving woman around. We should take him to the sea. We should also take him to the doctors. Maybe he needs to take a course of vitamins. You have to take care of your man, nurture and cherish him. Then he'll reciprocate. I had a diet, Victor shrugged. Very effective. I lost 20 pounds, by the way. I don't recommend repeating it to anyone. He kept silent about 3 years of life and 2 teeth. "Are you sure you don't have a wife?" the girl asked suspiciously, remembering her father's words. "And no children?" "No." Victor shrugged his shoulders. "Somehow it didn't work out. Do you want me to show you my passport?" And he really took it out and handed it to the girl. She turned the passport in her hands, but did not open it. "I believe you," Elsa replied, returning the document. "Listen, where did you disappear to? Do you realize that you can't do that? I've been thinking about you all week." "I'm sorry," the man said. "You see, I enjoyed our conversation outside that nightclub. But to tell you the truth, I didn't want to disappoint you. I'm going through a bad time in my life. I thought we'd never see each other again, and I'd gradually forget you. Then today, I was walking down the street and I saw your car. I rushed to the flower shop, got some flowers and waited." "Cool," the girl said. "Like in the movies. I work right next door, in that office over there. I hope you didn't wait long." Elsa did not tell her new friend that her father had found her the dustiest job in the world. She spent most of the day flipping through the story feed on her phone and fighting sleep. This, however, had no effect on her salary, which was decent even by Moscow standards. "It's great to work in downtown Washington," Victor said, "especially on a high floor. If it gets dreary, you can just look out the window and admire the panorama." "Yeah," nodded Elsa. "Look, let's just get this straight, okay? I'm not talking about a serious relationship, but adults don't talk like this, okay? We need to call, text, communicate. Will you give me your phone number today?" "Sure." "Where are we going?" the girl asked. "Take your pick, I'm driving." "Are you hungry?" Victor said. "No," shrugged Elsa. "The girls and I just had coffee." She did not tell about the fact that in an attempt to kill time she had once again ordered the delivery of sweets, and now she blamed herself for the extra calories. "I have an idea, but it's gonna have to be out of town. You okay?" "I like to take risks," smiled Elsa. "How far?" "A decent distance," Victor said. "One of my favorite places, but I haven't been there in a while. 3 years." Elsa's black BMW was just absorbing the kilometers. The girl drove so fast that her companion gripped the handle of the map with fear. Several times they hardly separated from the traffic. "What, are you afraid?" the girl asked with a challenge. "Don't be. I'm a prosecutor's daughter. I'm allowed to violate. Can Daddy get you out of the laws of physics too?" I would have slowed down a bit. But Elsa drove really well, or she was just lucky. She was always making some kind of rearrangement, pulling ahead, braking hard. However, when they got on the highway, the manner of driving changed a little. Elsa took the leftmost lane and pressed the pedal to the floor. "How far are we?" she asked. "Move to the right lane," Victor answered, "and slow down, okay? So you don't go around the corner." On a dirt road, they came to a huge field with green grass. Big pickup trucks and vans with trailers were parked everywhere. "What's this?" she asked. "A Bard's convention?" "No," Victor replied. "We're going to go hot air ballooning. They gather here every Friday in the spring and summer." Elsa pouted. "Why didn't you warn me right away? I'm afraid of heights." "Do you really know how to be afraid?" the man asked. "You and I just drove so fast on the highway that I had time to make a will in my head." "I don't know." The girl stretched out. "It's one thing to drive a car and another to fly. I'll only go if you hold my hand tightly." "All right," said Victor. "Let's go to the gondola." "The gondola?" "Yes. That's the name of the balloon basket. That's where we're going." Gradually, the balloon filled with warm air and the ascent began. The girl was afraid only in the first minutes. She literally clung to the man. Gradually, everything from below became small and was no longer perceived. The flight was exciting, but slow. "The balloon teaches slowness," Victor said. "It seems to me that if you hurry too much, you lose something important." Although the fear was gone, Elsa did not loosen her grip. She still hugged the man tightly. Traditionally, they were offered to drink champagne. Victor only tasted a glass, and the girl drank the drink in a gulp. And there, at the height, they kissed, very tenderly and delicately. From that kiss, Elsa climbed a little higher. The descent took even longer than the ascent. During this time, the girl managed to drink 2 more glasses. "How great," said the girl when they landed. "Listen, flying isn't scary at all." "Yes," the man shrugged his shoulders. "Where to next?" "Let's go for a drive," his companion answered firmly and headed for the car. "Where are you going?" Victor was surprised, watching Elsa going to the driver's seat. "You drank half a bottle of champagne." "I'm the prosecutor's daughter," the girl replied. "I'm allowed. And I feel sober." "Get in the passenger seat," the man demanded. "I'll drive." Although he expected resistance, the girl agreed. They drove back the way they had come, but now slowly and carefully. The engine was indeed revving and responded quickly to the slightest touch of the pedal. Driving such a powerful machine required the utmost care. Do you like it? The girl asked playfully, watching Victor driving the car. Yes, he answered. You know what? Let's go to your place. Do you have a place to park there? He had a nightmare. The first time he walked into the barracks in the nice warm sweater his father had given him. Looked at the dirty floor, the scuffed walls. He took in the disgusting odors of a place where 20 men huddled in a small room. How a criminal, whose hands were adorned with purple tattoos, had approached him and insistently asked him to share. I said, "Give it to me," the criminal demanded, pointing his finger at his sweater. "Give it to me, or I'll tickle you with a feather." He didn't know what that meant, so he didn't obey. And then he watched as a red stain spread across his sweater. Victor woke up in a sweat. At once he could not understand where he was, and for some reason he thought that he was still in the colony. Carefully, so as not to wake Elsa, he got up and went to the kitchen. I made myself some tea. Why are you awake? The girl asked, yawning. He woke her up anyway. It's 5 in the morning. I had a nightmare, Victor replied. Would you like some tea? I'd like something stronger. Elsa smiled. Are you watching TikTok over there? She looked at his phone. Victor was looking at the list of participants of the last Eurovision. I haven't heard of TikTok, he replied. I only remember Tic Tacs. It was a fresh breath draught. Everyone's been on it for 3 years, said Elsa. It's like Insta, only cooler. Although they said TikTok was for school children, now everyone is there. Who? Victor asked. Listen, talk to me like an old man. Hit or miss it, you know that? Of course, replied the man. Hit or miss can be translated as hit or miss. What's that got to do with it? It's a song from TikTok, smiled the girl. Everyone's been singing it for about 2 years now. I haven't heard it either. Victor shrugged his shoulders. What have you been doing lately? Elsa asked playfully. That you don't know anything at all. I was in prison, Victor answered, or rather, in the colony. Are you kidding me? No. Tell me, Elsa asked. Not now. If my criminal past doesn't scare you, I'd prefer to change the subject. No way, smiled the girl. You don't look like a criminal. Did I tell you that my father is a prosecutor? You did. Imagine, he has a gun, a real one. He's too lazy to clean it himself, so he asks me. Isn't that funny? It's hilarious, Victor replied sarcastically. Listen, you're so angry today. That's because I didn't sleep well. Shall we go get some sleep? You got it. The prosecutor had a phenomenal intuition, and he always sensed any danger. That morning he woke up and thought something was wrong. Slowly he got out of bed, threw on a robe, slipped his feet into his slippers, and walked to the safe. That's where guns were supposed to be kept. Although no one would check it, the prosecutor was meticulous in this matter. He looked at the gun where it was. I should clean it. His wife was already in the kitchen. She had made a mountain of pancakes. He was lucky to have a wife. Although they had a lot of money, she did everything by herself. Of course, the cleaning company did the general cleaning once a week, but Maddie did the rest. Where's Elsa? The prosecutor said instead of hello. I was going to ask her to clean the gun. Her hands are neat, because my fingers can't handle that kind of work. Ali's not here, smiled Maddie. Where'd she go? John yawned, thinking her daughter had gone to the gym. What a good girl, watching her figure. No, replied the wife. She didn't come back. You didn't sleep at home? John roared. This is unheard of. Well, if I catch sight of her... Why are you so nervous? Maddie asked. Well, our girl fell in love. She's 22 years old, just for a second. Until she gets married, she has to sleep at home. The prosecutor shouted and slammed his fist on the table. Maddie wanted to tell him that her daughter had warned her about her absence. But after such a violent reaction from John, she decided to keep silent. Our girl's growing up, Maddie said. What can you do? Everyone grows up. You're not going to get anywhere with threats. Tell me who she's with, the prosecutor demanded. Looking into his beastly eyes, the wife was truly frightened. Well, with this one, answered the wife, and her voice trembled. With Victor. Remember what she told us. Ah, John yawned. From the outside it might have looked like he had calmed down. But in reality, the anger in his heart was literally seething. Years of living a double life had taught him to hide his emotions. And as much as he wanted to tell his wife, the prosecutor decided to keep silent. Just yesterday he had checked on the databases. This Victor Gross really came out of the colony on parole. He'd have to whisper to the right people to get him back to finish his sentence. Or, I'm going to the hunter's cabin, said the prosecutor. When Elsa gets back, tell her to clean my gun and have her load the magazine. She's got neat fingers, not like my sausages. John called the hunter's lodge his secret summer house, the very one with a pylon, in common parlance pole, Finnish sauna, and Turkish hammam. The prosecutor did not like the bathhouse. From the hot steam he quickly began to suffocate. It was really possible to go hunting from here, but he had not used his own rifle for a long time. He had lost his taste for hunting years ago. Pulling the Jelen Virgin over to the side of the road, the prosecutor pulled out his phone and set up a secret chat room on Telegram. He needed to get in touch with the most loyal cop, one of those who knew about his double life. I need you, Frank, he wrote. Drop what you're doing and come to me. With the girls, the DA saw the message. No, drop everything and come. Elsa tried to get Victor out of her head and couldn't. Once she didn't call him for a whole day, and by evening, she was literally going crazy. The girl must have never loved anyone in her life. She stared at the man and tried to figure out what it was that got her. He was 11 years older than her, sad and thoughtful. She was especially surprised by the story of the prison. Why would he be there? Elsa and Victor saw each other almost every day. She had the feeling that he did not do anything, but just lived for his own pleasure. Together, they drank coffee in different cafes, walked in parks, and once went to the theater. He turned out to be an excellent lover, although he did not try to drag her to him at the first opportunity. On the contrary, she herself hinted to him that she didn't mind visiting again. She was estranged from her parents. Her father looked at her strangely. Their communication had lost its former warmth. Her mother still reminded her every chance she got of what an outstanding father she had. He's very clever, she said. The smartest man in the world. Look at the bracelet he gave me. Elsa wanted to ask her father if he had tried to gather information about Victor, but she decided not to remind him. What if her man was really a convict? She decided to look for information on her own, and then she was lucky. It turns out that about her boyfriend on the internet was a huge article exposure. In it, some journalists said that the aspiring businessman, who literally for a year created a small chain of coffee shops, turned out to be a drug dealer, and that the very name of the place, DUI, was supposed to suggest certain thoughts. At the end of the article, the author expressed doubts about the impartiality of justice, which gave such a serious criminal only 4 years in prison. The article said that the sentence was passed by the district court. Elsa had an acquaintance working there. They used to go to some courses together, and now they occasionally talk to each other. Now Victoria worked as a court clerk, and every time they met, she cried about how much work she had to do. Listen, can you pick up a case for me? Elsa asked. An old one. I'll come to you tonight, we'll have coffee, and you'll show me carefully. Victoria valued her friendship with the rich Muscovite very much, and therefore dared not refuse her. In general, the court should not be allowed outsiders. After all, the regime object. But she told the guard that a trainee would come to her, and he believed her. Hi, Victoria smiled, greeting Elsa. Listen, this is such a strange request. I'm sorry, replied the girl. This is my acquaintance. I wanted to know what he was on trial for. Curiosity, Victoria agreed. Man, your life is interesting. Listen, I'll quickly finish writing everything here, and we'll go to some cafe. I'm starving. Sure. Elsa picked up an old case and immediately hurt herself on a protruding staple. Blood dripped from her finger. Careful, Victoria said. When she heard her pal shriek, she immediately put some paper on her finger. It's okay, Elsa replied, though it hurt. Sorry, clumsy me. Last name, first name, pictures all match. It really was him, Victor. But when Elsa flipped through the dusty pages of the old file, her neat eyebrows went up. How long do I have to hang out with her? Victor asked during another meeting with men who didn't even give their names. I don't know. The short-cropped one shrugged his shoulders. The other one was still silent. Our corrupt prosecutor is about to do something. He won't wait long. I wish it was sooner, Victor said. I'm getting tired of all this comedy. What's wrong with it? The second man spoke up. What's not to like? A beautiful girl takes you for a ride in her car. That's what I don't like. That you're always following me. I can't relax at all. Be patient just a little bit, said the short-haired man. Since we're on this escalator, we have to go all the way to the end. There's no way to jump off. He was recently interested in your file. I don't think it was an accident. At this point, the plan had matured in the prosecutor's mind, and the most unbearable thing was to be patient. The very thought of an ex-con sleeping with his daughter disgusted him. And Mady was right. If he started to show his temper, it would only make things worse. Elsa will not give up this scumbag to spite him. No, he'll make everything nice and neat just the way he knows how, especially since John had done something like this many times before. The only thing was, he'd looked at things more calmly and even indifferently before, but now his thirst for revenge was clouding his eyes. It was getting harder and harder to hold back, and the time was so tense at the height of preventive work. On days like this, he had to control himself even better than usual. John not only liked to speak at anti-corruption meetings, but also knew how. He sincerely portrayed a man who would not take someone else's offering, not even at the risk of his own life. Corruption, the prosecutor said passionately, speaking at a regular meeting, is the very rust that corrodes the state from the inside. Imagine, you come to the state doctor, bleeding, and he demands that you grease his paw. Absurd, isn't it? The same can be said about any sphere. Corruption is not only harmful, it is unacceptable. Speaking to an audience, John was bright and persuasive. On those rare occasions, he wore a worn uniform, a government shirt and shoes. He was driven around in a company car, an old leader. But we do not remove the responsibility of bribe takers, the prosecutor continued. As they say, who took one sin, who gave 100? Here we go, said the first, the man with the short haircut. Don't scare them off, said the second. They're tough. If they suspect anything, they'll be in trouble. Frank's Mercedes looped through the Moscow streets. Soon the commissioner drove out on a country highway and took a course to the northeast. The former, seated behind the wheel, moved as freely as possible. He was approaching and releasing the pursued car. However, both first and second knew exactly where Frank was going. Maximum readiness, said the short-cropped man addressing the support group. Do nothing without my command. Lying on the floor of the Mercedes in an unnatural position, Victor began to regain consciousness. His body was terribly stiff. Both his arms and legs ached. Most importantly, he couldn't understand how he had gotten here. Every bump, every pothole felt like a blow in his body. Soon the car stopped. He heard the scraping of metal, as if someone was opening a gate. A deafening clang. The engine started again and the car drove on. He woke up. Victor heard a man's voice, as if vaguely familiar. Someone grabbed him roughly by the legs and pulled him out of the car. He hit his head on the hard floor. The same hand set the prisoner down and yanked the bag off his head. Right, said the kidnapper. That's the one. Look how well preserved he is. Victor easily recognized the policeman who had apprehended him 3 years ago. In more than 3 years, the opera's face had changed little, if at all. The wrinkles were deeper and the individual features even less. They were in either a garage or a workshop. There was a hook hanging from the ceiling, and Frank put Victor's hands on it and began to twist the winch. It made the bracelets bite into his wrists even harder, and the pain was unbearable. "Why don't you say anything?" No joy in his eyes. "What's going on? Where am I?" "I do not know anything," smiled Kidnapper. "The senior officer will be here in a moment, all questions to him." Somewhere behind him the door slammed. Victor wanted to turn around, but his movements were severely restricted by the handcuffs. He heard the clack of heels on the tile, and a second later he felt a hard kick in the ribs. "Hello," said the overweight man. His eyes were running and sweat covered his face. "Who are you?" Victor asked, though he had already guessed it himself. The mysterious prosecutor. It turned out that he really needed him. This time at least the reason was clear. "It wasn't enough for you, was it?" The prosecutor yelled, looking at the bound prisoner. "Not enough. 3 years hasn't taught you anything. All right, all right." He delivered several more blows to his torso, to his face, Victor writhing in pain. That's when the cop came to life. A look of bewilderment appeared on his face. "John," said the operative, looking at the beating of the prisoner. "We didn't agree to this. We've never done this before. Starting today, we're going to start," replied the prosecutor. He had caught the courage, and now no one could stop him. "So to speak, we're going to a new level. There's no point in staring at someone else's pile. You think I'll let that dealer go through the courts again? No way. We're gonna put him on trial right now. Right here. You believe it?" "John," the cop said, and there was genuine fear in his voice. "What are you talking about, John? I thought you said it was for a conversation." "Well, then talk to him. Why hit him? How are we gonna get away with it?" "Shut up," John demanded, but he stopped beating the prisoner. "I'll give you so much money, you'll get away with it. Like, you didn't do that." "How?" the policeman asked. "Like this," the prosecutor nodded at Victor. "You didn't pass sentences." "No," replied the cop. "It's one thing to throw a weight around. And what you want, John, I don't know." "You know everything," John replied, pulling a gun out of his pocket. From the other, he took out a silencer and began to screw it to the barrel, saying, "You know everything, oh Perog. It's all right, if you behave well, you'll become a chief. That's what I'm telling you, me." The prosecutor looked into the eyes of his prisoner. "Well, what do you want to say goodbye?" he asked and looked at his watch. "Well, there's not much time left. I have a wife waiting for me at home, a daughter, on whom you stole." "What are you doing?" Victor shouted and looked at the opera. "Hey, you! What are you standing there for? He's going to shoot." The policeman looked at him sadly and defiantly turned away. The prisoner longingly hoped that now, as in the movies, the gates would fly open and uniformed men would rush in. They would stop the lawlessness, restore justice. But inside, it was just the corrupt cop and John. No one seemed to be able to stop them. The DA raised his gun. His excitement had worn off a little. He often went hunting, but he never shot people. It turned out to be a little scary. "Where are these men?" thought Victor in horror. "Did they really trick me?" He looked straight into the muzzle of the silencer of the gun a prosecutor had pointed at him. "Death will not ask. It will come and mow you down," the prosecutor said. There was a click of the trigger. "Mom," Elsa said, "I came to say goodbye." "Say goodbye?" Maddie asked in surprise. "Where are you going?" "I'm not leaving, but flying away," she sighed. "I know everything about Daddy now. You know, it's kind of disgusting. This is all." She circled the furnishings of their luxurious apartment. "Disgusting?" Mom was outraged. "Didn't you hate studying? And exams to pass for free? And to drive a new car?" Elsa sighed heavily. She had tears in her eyes. "Mom, I did a bad thing," she said. "But you know, I didn't just save Daddy. I saved someone else." "What are you talking about?" Maddie asked in horror. "What's wrong with John?" "He's fine," Elsa said defiantly. "But if he wants to shoot his gun, he's in for a nasty surprise." She emptied her hand of ammunition. "I know everything, Mama," Elsa continued. "You know, it's too bad you didn't ask me. Because I'm against it. I don't agree, do you hear me? I'd rather live paycheck to paycheck, but I'd rather not touch anyone. And no one to frame. Goodbye, Mommy." Victor opened his eyes. The denouement of his story resembled a classic police series on TV. The prosecutor was lying on the ground with a gun lying beside him. John was surprisingly strong. Two masked guys tried to put their hands behind his back. "You have no right," shouted the prosecutor. "I'm a government official." The enforcers were silent. Finally, they managed to handcuff John. The first one worked on Victor's bracelets for a long time, saying, "Now, now, now." That "now" never came. "We'll take you to the hospital," said the second. On his face was bewilderment, as if he was talking to a ghost. "What hurts?" "Everything," Victor answered. "Are you out of your mind? He almost killed me." "I'm sorry," the first one said. "I'm really sorry. Slow down." "We didn't prepare for this," said number two. "We thought he'd throw it like he always does. But you see, you overdid it. Overplayed it." Victor still couldn't believe he was alive. He felt himself and looked for a trace of blood. He'd heard the click. "Does it hurt?" the first one asked. "We're going to the hospital." "I'm sorry, you'll have to go to court now. But then you'll have a good name. Compensation. You'll be fine." "You know what?" Victor said. "I don't trust you guys anymore. No one. You lied to me. Everybody did. Everybody. Everybody. And I've lied to everyone. That's what I am." And he began to laugh loudly, harshly, terribly. The first and the second tried to bring him to his senses, but he kept laughing. And even when the ambulance arrived and the paramedics sedated him, the smile still remained on Victor's face. "Listen, will he even be able to testify?" the first asked. "I'm worried." "Don't drift," yawned the second. "Listen, have you finished the repairs on your dacha at least? Let's go see his Turkish sauna. I want one for myself too."
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.